Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TopCyberPro podcast. I'm Jim West, founder and CEO of TopCyberPro.com. We have an amazing guest. I say this every episode. I know folks get tired of hearing it, but this guest, let me run the list of titles this gentleman has. He is a best-selling author. He has given over 300 plus keynote speaks. So he's a world stage speaker. He is a journalist, podcaster, and just so much more. An investigative reporter. There's so many titles we could give this gentleman. But without further ado, welcome to the TopCyberPro podcast, Mr. Geoff White.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
This gentleman has had a fantastic 20 plus year career so far. He's got so many miles ahead of him too, but he's got some interesting works that we're going to dive into here in just a minute. But I want Geoff to have just a little bit of opportunity to just kind of surmise his career. What are some of his specialties and what makes Geoff tick really?
Well, yeah, thanks for that. So I'm an author and investigative journalist, and what I cover is organized crime and technology. So wherever organized crime and tech tend to cross over, that tends to be where I hang out. So yes, I've done a lot of stuff about cybercrime, computer hacking, nation state attacks, and so on. But also I've looked at other issues like fraud gangs, pedophile networks operating online, internet dating fraud, money laundering. So wherever technology and crime tend to cross over, that's where I get interested.
And that's super exciting because, nowadays, all these documentaries we see like on the streaming services and even TV shows are focused around the dangers of tech. There's a great series called Black Mirror, which is a fictionalized version, but then we have a lot of documentaries talking about cyberbullying, cyber attacks, zero day. We have so much that we can cover at that intersection of the real life laws and tech. Your recent book is just phenomenal. It's called Rinsed, I'm not going to be able to get the full title here, but it's like From Cartels to Crypto. And can you give us the rest of the title and kind of give us the why bring this book to the public?
Yeah, so the rest of the title is how technology, how the tech industry is washing money for the world's deadliest crooks. And that's really what I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on how tech is enabling this world of money laundering. Money laundering is a tricky one. It's a bit like cybercrime in that, the public, they've heard of money laundering, they know it's a bad thing, but actually they don't really know a lot about money laundering. They might have seen Ozark, they might know that, you have suitcases full of money and what do you do with them? They might have heard that, nail bars or car washes might be where you go to launder money. But the actual mechanics
Yeah.
of laundering money is really interesting. Is there's actually a system. And I'll describe the system. I'm not breaking any laws by doing it. It's been written about by academics and stuff. Firstly, you have to get your money into the financial system. So you have to somehow take those suitcases full of banknotes and somehow ideally get them into a bank, because even criminals are worried about their money being stolen, right? Particularly criminals.
Yep.
So you need to place your money into a financial system. Then you need to wash it around. You need to mix it up so that you can't connect the incoming criminal money with the outgoing, clean money.
Legitimate appearing money. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the last thing is what's called integration, which is the fun bit. You get to spend it. And if you're smart, you don't just spend it on, cocaine and strippers. You spend it on something like a work of art or a business or property, something that you know is going to grow in value. And also that if you do go to prison for your offenses, for your drug dealing or whatever it is, when you come out of prison, well, the apartment is still there and it's still worth some money and you can live in it or whatever. So I described these stages, and then I described how technology is changing each of those stages of money laundering. It has to be said, that first stage of what they call placement, like getting your banknotes into the bank, increasingly for criminals, particularly the kind that I cover, cyber criminals, fraudsters, and so on, that's not the issue. The issue isn't that, because they don't tend to make money in cash so much. It tends to be they're hacking your bank account, they're stealing digital funds, they're hacking your crypto wallet, they're defrauding you out of your money. The money's already in the bank, it's already in the financial system. The problem with that is that second stage of mixing the money up and destroying the traces to the crime is actually harder. Because if you've got crypto, well, it can be traced. If you're stealing money from somebody's bank account, it can be traced. And so the fact that they're sort of stealing from within the financial system actually makes that second stage of mixing it up quite a lot harder. And that's where the technology comes in. Things like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, crypto mixers, stable coins, NFTs, video game currencies. All of these things have been used by criminals to try and launder the money.
Well, that's super interesting because we see, like you mentioned, the show Ozark, phenomenal show, folks. If you haven't seen it, Jason Bateman is just a delight in it. But there's been no show Breaking Bad with the car wash. I like how you mentioned the car wash. But we see in the shows where they rob the bank to get the money, but they go like to a casino because they figure they could gamble, and if they win the money they win is clean. But
Yeah.
it's a little bit more complicated than that because even casinos track money. There's a lot of cameras. There's a lot of tracking in the world. You mentioned cryptocurrency. We all know that it's decentralized. At least some platforms are, not all platforms, but generally speaking, it's decentralized. So you have a little bit of anonymity, and the dark web, deep web, you start getting in those areas of the web where a lot of malicious activity happen. But it's super interesting that you brought this book because for years, I got ridiculed years ago when I was in a conference and the question was posed to everybody in the room, what organizations have the top of the line cybersecurity programs? And people would name the usual suspects. They'll say the CIA, FBI, NSA, banks, Federal Reserve, all the usual suspects. But then I raised my hand. I said organized crime syndicates. And everybody just kind of chuckled. And I said, no, it's true because not only do they have to be secure to have secure operations, period, because of other competing interests and rivals and people inside stealing money, they also have to be a step ahead of the authorities and the
Yeah.
people that are trying to track them down, trace their money. So I say they adopt emerging technology faster than the rest of us, like AI. Malicious actors adopt it super fast, and they use every tool they can to stay that one step of ahead. So when you
Yes.
mentioned this cartels to crypto, I was like, wow, someone that is shining a light where a lot of people have been oblivious to. So I love this. Is there anything more in the book that you would like to share that you're willing to share for people as far as an insight you've gained through all of your investigations and research?
Yeah, the book covers a lot of different types of crimes. It goes through things like cartel drug dealing, obviously. It also goes through things like prostitution, people trafficking. It goes through fraud. It goes through kind of nation state attacks that have been attributed to North Korea that I've covered an awful lot. And I think one of the things that I want to say about this technology and money laundering issue is that it's not that technology companies and technologists wake up in the morning and want to enable money laundering and enable cybercrime. That's not really, I don't think, why most of them get out of bed in the morning. But they do want to create sort of radical new technology. And if you think about what the tech industry and particularly tech startups want and what a money launderer wants, you actually find a lot of common ground. So if I'm a tech startup, I want to create a business that's international. They all want to scale globally.
Mhm.
I want to create a business where there's lots of money flowing about, lots of transactions going on, busy marketplaces,
Mhm.
what you want, where values are kind of relative. And again, if you look at something like Uber, for example, how much is an Uber taxi worth? Well, whatever you'll pay for it, surge pricing, as they call it.
Yeah.
You also want to go as a technologist where there's little regulation. And again, you can look at Booking.com, Airbnb, OnlyFans, Uber, all these places. They got started because there wasn't much regulation. So you
Mhm.
can sweep in, dominate, get your app launched, and the regulators will catch up maybe a year later and go, well, what happened there?
Laws in the books are 2, 3 years behind. Yeah.
Exactly, precisely. Now, think about that and think about what a money launderer wants. If I've got tons of money, well, firstly, I want international. I want to be able to drop my money in here in London and withdraw it in Los Angeles. I want to be able to globally move my money. That's really important. Second thing, yes, I want lots and lots of money sloshing around in this system. If I take $1 million of dodgy money and drop it in. I want that just to be seamless to vanish into this tidal wave of money. So I want lots of transactions. Yes, fantastic. Another thing, of course, lack of regulation. As a money launderer, I do not want the cops sniffing over. I do not want the regulators sniffing over. So it's not that technologists want to help money launderers. It's just that the things that technologists often want in their business is precisely the stuff that you want as a money launderer.
Yeah.
There's a symbiosis.
Yeah. It's an interesting conversation because I'm a big proponent of cryptocurrency and the leverage and the utility of it. I don't want to get off too much on NFTs, but I believe NFTs didn't take off properly. It got kind of hijacked by the fear of missing out and the gold rush of people scamming people over digital artwork. But I believe there's so much utility in it of authenticity when we think of digital or like products like luxury products like handbags and so forth, where you would have a NFT representing ownership from the blockchain of that maker of that product. I believe it'll come back. It just might not be called NFTs, but with that technology, blockchain, and so forth, I really believe when we talk about like when you travel internationally, there's these rules and regulations. It used to be, I think, $10,000 you had to declare if you had an amount of money on you carrying. So you just can't take hundreds of thousands of dollars on your person through airports because they will detain you and they're gonna,
Yes.
you will be under investigation and they
Yeah.
could confiscate that. Same thing with precious metals. You can't take like pounds of gold with you, but with cryptocurrency, it's wherever you are in the world. As long as you have an internet connection,
Yeah.
it's like you just said, it checks that mark of being global, being available to you anywhere you are.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's brilliant that you've done. Now, here's a question I have because we hear about it like countries like Russia. Anytime a journalist does any kind of, I guess, investigative report, publishes an article, a blog post, what have you, or even a tweet, they sometimes fall out of a window, right? In countries like Russia. But you're obviously in a much more secure country. You're based in the UK, I believe. And
Mhm.
so, but is there still concerns when you are investigating these criminal organizations, nation states that, hey, you might put yourself maybe in danger or at least a digital target? Have you found yourself a target at any point in your career from groups of this nature?
Every now and again, yeah, I've had sort of threats from people, but they weren't what I'd call palpable threats. It wasn't, we know where you live and we're coming around to get you. Um, there is always the issue of digital violence, as it were, having your sort of accounts raided and defaced, or just your communications surveilled, and that is a real serious issue. I'm lucky. I work with some of the world's biggest publishers. I work with the BBC and Audible and Penguin and people like that. They have their own cybersecurity teams who
Mhm.
obviously look after their estates. They look after me as a contributor, as a sort of freelancer for them. But the other thing I'd say is that I'm constantly speaking to people who've fallen victim to these gangs and to these
Mhm.
attacks and hacks and frauds and so on. So through that, you do get a fair sense of what the state of the art in terms of the tactics are.
Yeah.
And so I'd hope that I'm a little bit more briefed and a little bit more clued up on how the hacks might happen, how the intrusions might happen than the average bear. However, touch wood, things have gone okay so far, but you never know. I mean, it can take a moment of weakness,
Just one
and you
moment,
just,
right?
you're on the road, you get an email, you're expecting the email, you think, oh, I'll click on it, you enter your password, and that's it. So, yeah, I take as much care as I can, but nobody's ever bulletproof. No matter how much you know, you can still get caught out.
Wonderful statement. You mentioned you talked to so many victims, from all those, hundreds and hundreds of conversations I'm sure you've had and communications with these victims. Is there like a number one theme or tip that you would take their, I guess, you think of like the wrecked ships on the shore, right? So if you was
Mm.
to shine that beam like a lighthouse and you had one tip in that beam to shine out to the public, what would be that one tip across all those, victims that you've interfaced with that you would
Yeah,
give someone that's listening and watching this right now?
yeah. I think it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's one you do have to keep paying attention to, which is that as you use a communication channel more and more, and as more people reach you through that communication channel, your brain is wired to develop a certain amount of trust in it. So I don't know about you, but when I boot up my email, my personal email, or I switch on my phone, my text messages, I'm sort of wired to think, oh, I wonder who's messaged me today. Oh, there's a message from my mum, there's a message from my friend, and so on.
Just open,
Um,
open, open. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's quite difficult to keep up in your brain the fact that I always compare it to, like, I used to live in a flat in London, and the front door fronted right onto the street. So it's one of these times where the front door opened and you was in our flat. The letterbox thereby was directly onto the street. And we used to get all sorts of stuff through the front door. I mean, at one stage, a half-eaten kebab came through the front door. Your your inbox, friendly as it may seem, is the front door to an extremely busy street with some pretty unpleasant people on it. So that's the thing. It's that constant vigilance, that constant reminder that no matter what messages arrive, no matter how much they may seem friendly and from friends, it's that constant vigilance that you need to keep, that constant drip feed of vigilance. It's really hard though, and as I say, keeping that up 24/7 is really difficult, even for people who are extremely well briefed in security, and for criminals who are extremely paranoid. You can get caught out, but if you can just keep that constant drip feed sense of it could be suspicious. It might not be my mum. It could be suspicious.
Well, wonderful advice and a great key word right there, vigilance, right? So we could talk an hour plus just on this one book, but I do know you have two other great books I wanted to get to right now. You have The Lazarus Heist. So what's the story with The Lazarus Heist, and can you give us kind of a synopsis and a little insight into it?
Yeah, The Lazarus Heist is a book about North Korea's cyber war. Um, I'm pretty sure it would be the same case in the UK, in the US as the UK. If you talk to the British intelligence agencies, they will generally rank the threats, the nation state threats against the UK in order, the top two being Russia and China, generally interchangeably, numbers three and four being Iran and North Korea, which is quite a surprising turn
Hmm.
of events. North Korea, most people don't have a computer, let alone an internet connection. And yet, North Korea turns out to be in the sort of Premier League of cyber threats. How did we get here? That's really what the book and the podcast, the BBC podcast on which the book was based, is talking about. It's the story of how North Korea developed this ability. And I think one of the points I make about that is the weirdness of the fact that North Korea is so cyber enabled for a country that most people don't associate with technological advancement. That's the whole point, is that North Korea's realized our technological advancement in the West, in countries like the UK and the US and further afield, is actually our problem. You know, they can attack us because we are so reliant on technology. We're so reliant on computers. So North Korea's realized that this is potentially our Achilles heel, and that they can reach out from inside North Korea, from Pyongyang, and reach out into the West and actually use the technology we all rely on against us. And that's
Yes.
happened, you know, time and time again. Notably 2017, the WannaCry attack, which spread around the world, it caused huge problems in the NHS here in the UK. And so the book describes this sort of journey that we've been on. I have to say, though, I mean, the book Lazarus Heist was published in, I'm going to say 2022, initially in hardback. Subsequently, we've had, you know, 3 straight years of increasing North Korean cyber behavior, culminating this year in February
Yep.
2025 with the attack on Bybit, a crypto exchange, which resulted in the theft of $1.5 billion
Yes.
worth
A lot
of
of money.
cryptocurrency. The largest theft in human history. There
Hmm.
is no single attack on one victim valued at the time of that theft
Hmm.
that is higher than 1.5 billion. It doesn't exist. It's the biggest theft
And to
ever.
kind of put that in perspective, when you mentioned earlier that North Korea is not viewed as like this, like, like Japan has Fujitsu, Sony has all these tech companies. You don't really think of North Korea as being a juggernaut in the tech space. But what I
No.
always tell people, it's about what you can learn, right?
Yes.
All of the hacks and scripts, they're published in the dark web, they're published on the public internet. They
Yeah.
have all of the information at their disposal, because the internet has been the great equalizer for so many countries, for so many people at different socioeconomic levels. Where
Yeah.
before someone now leveraging the internet could become what I call internet favorites, have their viral moment, and next thing you know, their whole lives are changed forever because of the
Yeah.
power of the internet, right? And the
Yeah.
information in the internet has enabled these, like North Korea, to really up their game to what I call level 99 to compete with
Yeah.
hacking nation states like Russia, China, the normal suspects or the usual suspects we hear. Then we're like, you're absolutely right. We hear about Iran, we hear about North Korea, and it's like, wait a minute, we don't know a lot about them, but how are they in the mix? But it's
Yeah.
because they leverage their brain power
Yeah.
and what technology they do have. It's not like they're sitting on quantum computers or like the top 500 supercomputers in the world. But the point being is that technology, just like with crime and everything else, it's the great equalizer. It makes you
Yeah.
can have the top agencies in the world, like the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, the FBI, and all these wonderful crime fighting organizations. And when you talk about human trafficking, drug trafficking, all of that, the cartels and the organized crime syndicates are leveraging technology to stay that one step ahead, to avoid to encrypt their communications, to avoid the interception of information and so forth. And that's where technology, again, the great equalizer for everyone, right? It creates a kind of a level playing field so that everybody can play on the field, right? No matter what country you are. But the other side of that is that we create the condition of asymmetric warfare in cyber, where you could be the big US with all of our supercomputers and all our technology and all our security systems, but we only need that one system to come in that one little avenue where there's zero-day threat or etc. to just collapse that. In a way, it's a digital house of cards, but maybe not as drastic as I'm trying to paint the picture. But the point being is they only got to be right once. We got to be right there 100% of the time for protecting everything. And every day it changes. So I
Yeah.
love that you're writing about these things. There's another book you have, and folks, pause this video, go to the description. I'm going to have all the links to all of his books right in the description. So please, check some of these books out. Something we're talking about piques your interest, buy the book because, don't just go and download it from a legal site. That is not the right thing to do, folks. Buy the book. This man has worked really hard and done all the research and provided really interesting things in these books to learn about. You have another book called crime.com. And so now we're seeing this complete theme where you've really dedicated your life, like you said, to investigating and researching these financial crimes in tech. So, crime.com, give us a little synopsis about what this book is about.
Well, yeah, this book was the first one that I wrote, and actually I got commissioned by a publisher to write what was described at the time as a history of cybercrime. And by that
Okay.
time, I'd been working as a journalist investigating, organized crime and tech for many years, for more than a decade. And I wasn't particularly interested in writing a history book, but the more we talked about it, the more it became clear that, well, the history of cybercrime is now. It's a very,
Yeah.
very recent history. So, but we did start that book actually right the way back in the sort of 70s, the birth of the internet.
Hmm.
And this there was an interesting distinction around that time, which has fallen out of favor, but it's quite a useful distinction between hacking and cracking.
Okay. Yeah.
Hacking is a very, very old practice, way older than computers. The idea of you hack something together, your train track doesn't work anymore. You hack some train track together.
Mhm.
It's an engineering term,
Yes.
and so people in the early days of computers would hack. They would bolt something together. Crackers were people who were doing that for illegal or illicit or murky purposes. Um, the phrase cracking that fell out of favor, and now we just have this term hacking, which obviously covers both the legitimate and illegitimate side. But I want to start that book right back at those early days because I want to make this sort of point that the DNA, the soul, if you like, of hacking is actually bedded right back in that curiosity, in
Hmm.
that idea of looking at something with a left field view, looking at it as it's never been looked at before, trying to work out what you're not supposed to do, the buttons you're not supposed to press, and seeing what happens if you
Yeah.
press them. And
It's like, how
time and
does
time
this
again,
toaster work? Let me take it apart first.
exactly, exactly. And then I can't put it back together again. We have no toast. But
Good way to put it.
um, you know, a lot of people you talk to who've become hackers, either legitimate hackers or as in security testers, or illegitimate hackers, or a bit of both. They started out with illegitimate, have gone straight subsequently. They started out with that thing of what happens if I press the wrong buttons? What happens if I don't type in the commands you want me to type in? What happens if I enter something in this field that's completely weird and then press go? Oh, it broke. Why did it break? That there is a very, very clear mindset around that, and it starts, with this early technology, this early computer technology, with which you can do basically anything. You're only limited by the lines of code you type in. Anyway, the book went through all of that early history, and then things like the Cult of the Dead Cow, Chaos Computer Club, all of those
Mhm.
classic sort of 80s into 90s kind of hacking collectives. Obviously, it's the anniversary of the film Hackers this year.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so all of that kind of culture, and then it sort of leads up, and the book kind of worked its way through all of that, and then talked about what was then the sort of culmination, which really finishes with the 2016 presidential election
Hmm.
and what
The
happened
big,
around
yeah.
cybersecurity, theft of emails from the Democrats, and so on. And so that was the sort of at the point that was kind of the high tide mark. The book I think was published in I'm going to say 2020, and so it went up to about 2018, 2019. I will say when that book came out, I was worried, and I sort of said to my wife, is this? Do you think cyber's still a sort of still a thing? Is it gonna, is actually gonna have any kind of future? And she said, well, when was Hackers released? And I said, at that point, it was about 25 years ago. And she said, yeah, I think cyber's still going to be a thing. And she's been proved right. We've got
Yeah.
this. But what's interesting now is, and I really think for your listeners, it's really worth paying attention to this, is we know cyber's a thing. We know hacking's a thing, obviously. I worry that things like fraud and money laundering and financial crime that we've talked about in this, for a lot of your listeners who are in that kind of cyber field, who are either practicing, working in it, or just covering it, thinking about it, looking at it, they sort of see that world as a bit different. That the financial crime, money laundering, that's somebody else's job. It isn't. That there's a collapsing together of those worlds.
Hmm.
The more I cover the cybercrime, fraud, money laundering type nexus, the harder I find it to draw a distinction between the different gaps. Business email compromise, perfect example. You send an email to somebody, say, hey, I've changed my bank account. Please pay me to this new bank account. And of course, the email comes from a criminal who set up a new bank account, and the company pays the new bank account, and the money's gone.
Hmm.
Is that? It's not a cyber attack,
No,
but
it's
it
a
is
phishing
LLA.
attack. It actually is a cyber attack, right?
Well, yeah, is
Yeah. So
it?
whether
Yeah.
you're a bank, a financial, a fintech company, if you're touching money at any level, or even other businesses that fall, victim to certain type of attacking groups or APTs, there's financial medical groups where they get the ransomware attacks. That's been really popular for the past 5 years,
Mm,
where
mm,
their patient records and how they conduct business is encrypted, and they have to pay so much Bitcoin to possibly get it decrypted. And we don't hear probably about, I would say about 80 to 90% of these things that happen on a regular basis, we'll never hear about it because it won't, unless they do a press release or somebody uncovers it and it's put out in the news. We only probably hear about 10% or less about these crimes because most companies don't want to admit that they were a victim, right?
yeah.
Because their stock prices would tumble. And just like with the cryptocurrency markets, any platform that gets hacked, they usually take a huge dip
Mm.
within the first 24 hours of the news breaking. So folks, these are some wonderful books. Do you have a book in the immediate future, or down the road that you're like, hey, my next one, or can you even begin to talk about that at this point?
I can, but it's not a great story. Having done three books, I sort of thought, oh, I'd quite like to do a fourth book. This seems to be
Uh,
going very well. Um, I did pitch a fourth book, and it got turned down by so far seven different publishers have turned
okay.
that down. So it's not a given once you've done three that you can do a fourth. However, I have got in mind an idea for. I've got a couple of ideas for what another book could look like. But to be honest, I've got loads on my plate at the moment, and one of the
Sure.
things I'm working on is a new podcast for the BBC, which is going to be about cybercrime, which will
Nice.
be going out early next year, and that's keeping me very, very busy at the moment. I'm really excited
Well,
about
the
it.
pitch
So,
right now is if you are a literary agent or work with a publisher and you are interested in the previous books he's got, his LinkedIn will be in the description below. Reach out to Geoff and say, hey, we want to hear what you got because this man has got so much knowledge and just these three books are just phenomenal and exciting. When people think about like a tech book, they're like, oh, it's probably boring, gonna put me to sleep. But you're talking about crime, right? I mean, people love crime documentaries. Like just in the past month, I think I've watched a couple of a heist. I love heist documentaries. There was
oh
one that
yeah,
was I think it was is it Antwerp, which is the diamond capital of
oh the Antwerp Diamond Heist, yes.
yes. Watch it as just spectacular. And so people love crime, right? Whether it's murder, serial killers, crime, heist. People
Yeah.
love these things, and your books taps right into that vein of just excitement, where you're taking something that most people just casually let go by their newsfeed, but man, that is just some just really riveting stuff. At least for me, and I'm
Well,
in cyber, and so it definitely gets the blood pumping.
Well,
Um,
the Antwerp Diamond Heist. Interestingly, we talk about biggest heist. That is a contender for one of the biggest heists in history. It was 100 million, I think. Antwerp.
mhm.
Was that 2000? Was it 97 or was it 2003?
I just saw it, and I can't remember the
I
time frame,
forget.
but it had to have been like the late '90s, is
Yeah,
what it looked
but I
like
mean,
to me.
but that that took it took them a long time. They had to obviously scope out the building. They had to steal the diamonds and so on. That got them 100 million. Just to put
Mhm.
this in context, the North Korean one that I talked about from February, that 1.5 billion they stole, they transferred that in 2 minutes 36 seconds.
36 is like
Fastest theft ever.
wow. The other documentary I remember was the one where they had the diamonds. It was I forget the name of the real big diamond, but it was in London at that
Ah,
big inflatable dome. I'm trying to remember the name of this
well, the
documentary.
Millennium Dome, yeah.
The Millennium Dome. So they had these diamonds on display there, and so they had this bold attack where they rammed in a construction vehicle, had some smoke grenades, but the police, this special task force, had already been tracking them and following them. But it was a very interesting because had they been successful, that would have also been one of the biggest heists of all time. But just the point about heist in general is exciting. It's riveting. It's just how did they find a way to go through all the layers of defense to execute that exfil, and like you said, 2.5 minutes, that's nothing. That's people spend more time trying to decide what they're going to eat for dinner, right? So of these three books, and this is just a good question, let's say someone's watching right now, it's like, hey, I love everything there, but I only got enough money to buy one book today. Which of these three, and I know you might want to mention Rent since it's the most current one, but if you had to say, hey, if someone likes all three, but you said, hey, to start with this one, what would you recommend first?
I mean, look, the middle one, Lazarus Heist, probably had the most take up and readership and so on. The problem with that is there's an amazing bit that wasn't in Lazarus Heist about the North Koreans. The
Okay.
North Koreans ended up working with an Instagram influencer originally from
Oh,
Nigeria called Hush Puppy, who laundered a bunch of their money. I never quite worked out how they got Hush Puppy. I found that story and I put it in Rinsed. So
okay.
get Lazarus Heist is good fun. It's a good romp,
Yeah,
but I have
but
to
the
say, if you want the real juice, you've got to get Rinsed because the
all
story's
right,
in there
Renz
and
has
it's absolutely
got the tea and the juice. Wow, I love it. So all those description folks are in the description below. So during your time, I mean, you've worked so many of the top news agencies in the world. I mean, we're talking BBC, Sky News, the Sunday Times. There's just a long list here. I mean, it would take me 5 minutes to read everything you've done. You've also been on 300 plus keynotes, right? So with all of these things and this information you shared, has there been any challenges you faced? Because, like, for example, you're trying to get your fourth book done, and a
Mm.
lot of doors seem to be shut right now. But through this journey of you making these books and trying to track down like contacts and information, has it been a challenge that you had to work really hard to overcome, and that you could share with us a story?
Yeah, there's just this interesting thing around the fact that as an investigative journalist, the more you investigate, the more you realize it just throws up more questions. You know, as soon as you answer one question, there's five other questions immediately get presented. And also, there is this slight concern you end up with about what is actually true. My whole thing is, as an investigative journalist, I looked into it, I investigated it, I read all the documents. This is what happened. There are times you encounter which are quite bewildering moments. That there's a slight sense of vertigo about this, where you realise that unless you were there watching it happen with your own eyes as a journalist, sometimes it's quite difficult to really know what happened and what's true, no matter how many people you speak to. The Bangladesh bank case is a perfect example. North Korea's hackers accused of breaking into Bangladesh bank in 2015. Famously, they transferred out money, and in order to cover their tracks, they disabled the printer that printed out the confirmations of the transfers.
Oh, okay.
So, they did 35 different transfers. Normally, there'd be a printer that would print out 35 pages confirming the transfers. As part of their hack, they hacked the printer. Now, I'd always thought that they hacked the printer and stopped it printing anything. And that's certainly what one of the tech investigators who actually analyzed the code, this guy had hands-on with the code and said, they stopped the printer didn't print anything. The guy who was in the bank investigating the incident responder tells it different. He says, no, it printed, but it didn't print anything on the pages. They were just blank pages.
Blank pages, wow.
Both of those people are extremely good sources and very well informed and were eyes on for that incident. Both of them tell a different story. Now, there is a certain point as a journalist where you just have to put both in front of the audience and say, look, we don't know, here it is. But it just does make you realise that much as you may really feel like you've found the bottom, there's always further to go down. You can find what you think is the bottom of the ocean floor, and then suddenly you sink in a bit and you realise you're not at the ground level yet. So that's been one of the challenges. And also how long you keep going before you just declare defeat and say, look, I don't know. It's who knows?
It reminds me of the Archimedes' exhaustive method when he approximated pies. The story goes that he kept coming up with he would do slices of a circle, and he would get close, and then but he'd see that the number would change from the last number he had. So then he said, "Well, let me slice it a little bit more," and he kept having a different number. So he just got so frustrated. He did this for days on end till he finally just called it and said, "At least up to this many digits. I know it doesn't change, but it keeps changing beyond." And he just threw his hands up. Like you said, you just got to call it sometimes. Um, so Geoff, we could talk for hours and hours, and so far what you're saying is just super riveting to me. My face shows it. Like I'm super excited to listen to you to talk about your books and the things that you've investigated. But we need to kind of move on to the rest of the agenda. So one of my favorite questions I ask all my guests is their day one story, right? You probably didn't when you was a young man want to be an investigative journalist and do all these amazing things, even though it's amazing things that you do. But what was that day one story when you said, this is the direction I want to take my career and I want to investigate, like you just said, the intersection of crime and tech?
Yeah, so I've worked for various different news organisations, as you've mentioned. I've worked for BBC and Sky and people like that. The issue I've had with working on day-to-day news, hard news, the kind of daily news you see in the newspapers on the TV channels, is that there's this rolling news agenda, and so the idea is, well, you come in that day and you cover that day's news, and once that day's news is done, the next day you cover the next day's news. And I always had this thing of, well, I'm not done with the previous day's news. I like to get things finished and complete and done.
Yes.
There's also a sense of imposter syndrome, because as a journalist you're meant to know everything. You know about this story, and I always felt this sense that, well, I don't really know that story. All I know is the 8 hours of work I did on it yesterday.
Yeah.
But if you ask me anything more than that, I just wouldn't know. So I felt this sense of incompleteness, both in terms of my knowledge of the subject, but also in terms of what we were presenting the audience with. And the other thing is with these cyber attacks, as I'm sure you're familiar with this cycle, there'll be, oh my God, there's been a hack, a thing's been hacked, quick, the hack, and then the next day nothing.
Yeah.
And you think, well, was that important? And with these cybercrimes particularly, and it stretches into things like, the financial crime, the money laundering stuff that I've covered. It's only really months, sometimes years later, that you actually get the story. All the gaps are filled in, and you can go back and say, right, now I can tell you the story, and I can answer all the questions, and I know all the bits. Because it used to really irritate me when people asked things that I didn't know about the story, and I'd think, well, I don't know, and they think, well, why don't you know? You're supposed to have investigated this. So that's how I got into investigation, was really to be able to say to somebody, I know everything about this, and no matter what question you ask me, I will know the answer to it, and I'll put them all in front of you, and you'll be able to actually understand the whole thing. It's a service to you as a viewer, as a listener, as a reader, but it's also fulfilling my needs and scratching my itch for really wanting to actually have the story and know the story. So
And isn't
that's
that
how
just what a heart of a true journalist is get to the truth of the story, right?
ideally.
I love
But
that.
there are people, it's important to have people who are just constantly chasing the news, chasing,
Yeah.
that's really important. You need both. You need that, but you also need people who go back and say, right, now the dust has settled, let's actually tell this story. I'm not saying on the day news is bad. I'm just saying for me, it never
No, no.
really
But I mean,
took my fancy.
this is the type of news that I live for, right? This is what feeds documentaries because it's akin to being like a documentary, getting to the truth, right? Presenting the story, getting to the truth. In your career, you've had, 2 decades plus, but in your career, have there been people that have had a positive impact in your career? Whether there were people that you looked up to and said, "Hey, I want to be like them one day," or maybe a manager, colleague, coworker, boss that had a positive impact on you. So the goal of this question is just to give you an opportunity to shine a light and pay homage to a couple of people that have been influential in your career.
Yeah. Interestingly, from when I started covering sort of cybercrime, when I started getting into the technology beat and into that sort of tech news, hard news beat, it was often people doing longer form journalism, so things like books and podcasts and so
Mhm.
on, that I just thought were great and that I really admired and kind of wanted to emulate. There's a writer called Misha Glenny, who's a British writer who writes about European politics, but he wrote a book called Dark Market, which was about the famous dark market, one of the first sort of the first sort of big crime forums, cybercrime forums to be set up, and that was just amazing. Then obviously the work of people like Andy Greenberg, who write these great spiraling, sprawling, sort of narrative-led articles. I think Andy's work is absolutely fantastic, and just various other journalists. Bradley Hope wrote a book called Billion Dollar Whale. There was a co-author, and I cannot remember the co-author's name to my shame. Billion Dollar Whale was great. Really, really inspirational in terms of how the narrative was laid out. John Carreyrou, who wrote Bad Blood, which is about the Theranos scandal, this blood testing service that turned out to be a complete sham. So all those people who write those kind of books where they just follow the story along, huge inspiration for me, and just finding the gold standard really as a journalist, and I think increasingly as a journalist, but particularly also for things like podcasting and the kind of books that I write. Find the person who was there at the time. Find the person who was in the room, who had the ringside seat,
Mhm.
and get them to tell you their story. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't there, I didn't see it, but I can find someone who was, and they will tell me the story. And that's what an audience, I think, really wants to hear. You want to hear the person who said, "I opened the door, and this is what I saw." So I think journalists who are doing and can do that stuff, I say people like Andy Greenberg at Wired and so on, are really, really great people.
Wonderful. So this is a part of the podcast where I like to take kind of a break. We've been talking, cyber tech crimes and so forth, and I call it my moment of levity. And it's just a couple rapid fire questions I'm going to shoot at you. Whatever the first answer pops in your head, just blurt it out. And there's no right or wrong answer. So if you're ready, if you humor me, I'm going to shoot you some questions your way. So we'll
No.
start off with one. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
Hot dog's not a sandwich. Okay. Cake or pie?
A cake, British
What
cake, I
kind of
think.
cake?
Oh, inevitably chocolate.
Hot or cold chocolate cake?
Cold. You don't heat
Cold?
chocolate cake. The chocolate melts. You get messy.
Okay, so cold chocolate cake. This one splits the room for the tech people. Okay, so Star Wars or Star Trek?
Always Star Wars for me.
Star Wars, UK, right?
Yeah.
So many
I can
acronyms.
explain why if you want me to, but
I
yes.
would love to hear it.
The original Star Wars Episode 4, or as we knew it when I was a kid, Star Wars,
Yes.
is an absolute masterclass of storytelling. And when people talk to me about like, how do I tell a story? How do I communicate about cyber? How do you communicate about anything? Number one, you have to have a story. And a story has three things. It has a victim, a villain, and a hero. Star Wars has that. In cyber, if you say, well, why is nobody interested in my story of how I saved the day? It's like, well, because there's no victim and villain. The first thing has to be the victim so that you feel empathy. In Star Wars, one of the first characters you see is Princess Leia, the victim. She goes on a journey. She doesn't remain the victim, but she is at the initial thing the victim. And
She's
the second
captured.
major character you see is Darth Vader, who comes into the door, the villain. You've immediately got the victim and the villain. It's jeopardy. And the thing about Star Wars Episode 4, if you look, I have not watched all the Star Wars stuff, I just can't keep up anymore.
Mhm.
But if you look at Episode 4, that story, why start with Episode 4? It's always this intriguing thing of why do they start? It's because at that moment in the story, the victim and the villain are physically, geographically, as close as they ever get.
Yes.
It's almost never happens in subsequent series where Leia and Darth Vader come really, really close together, like that. That's why you start at that moment. So it's an absolutely perfect thing. And then you bring in the hero characters. Then there's Luke Skywalker, there's Han Solo, there's Chewbacca, Obi-Wan Kenobi. All the hero characters kind of pile in. But
Mhm.
you start the movie with that moment of a victim and a villain. Beyond that, though, what you need is someone to introduce you to this world, to open this world up to you. They're what's called the cipher characters. In a drama, you have cipher characters. So in a horror film, you'll have like the old woman sweeping up the thing says, "Oh, there used to be an Indian burial ground under here, and there are still
Yeah.
ghosts around it." The person who explains what's going on. Brilliantly in Star Wars, you have C-3PO and R2-D2, and it's an easy choice to make, but it's still absolutely fantastic. R2-D2, of course, does not communicate in English. So C-3PO, guess what, has to explain what R2-D2 says. Oh,
Yeah.
you've said this, and yes, you're right, this is the Death Star. So you have this way of C-3PO explaining to the audience through R2-D2 what's happening. So they set the thing up, then you've got the victim, then you've got the villain, then you've got the hero set. If you have to explain storytelling to anybody, Star Wars is the film. You sit them down and get them to watch, and it just shows them that's how you tell a story 101.
Wow.
Star Trek doesn't do that. It's not a bad thing. It just
Yeah.
doesn't do that. So there you
I
go.
have never heard a more brilliant representation of breaking down a story and Star Wars in the same several paragraphs. That's just was just brilliant the way you just did that. In fact, it made me want to forget about my next question, but I just
Sure.
remembered it. What has been your most favorite book of all time that you've read, and what was the last book that you've read?
Um, Favorite book of all time. That's a really difficult one, and I think um, I go to the most one that I read most recently, which is a book called Dead in the Water, which is an amazing. No, no, actually, there was one before that that was even better. It's depressing, but it is an incredible book. It's called Nuclear War. It's by a woman called Annie Jacobson. It is a second by second breakdown of what will happen if North Korea launches a nuclear weapon. And it is astonishing. It's brilliantly researched, but it's also, when they say unputdownable, that thing of, I missed my bus stop or my train stop. I literally missed my tube stop because I was reading it and I looked up and I was like, I forgot to get off the train. Astonishing book, Nuclear War by Annie
Wow.
Jacobson.
Okay. Make sure you give me the links for these books because I want to share them with readers in the links below. And then what was the last book you read? Was it also the same?
No, the last book I read was a book called. The last book I read was a book called At the Tomb of the Inflatable Pig,
Okay.
which is a book about Paraguay,
Okay.
a country that most people know nothing about, and I knew nothing about. Paraguay is an absolutely mad country, and this book is it's by a guy called John Gimlet or Gimlet. Don't know how you pronounce his name. And it's a really fascinating travelogue about Paraguay, and
Okay.
yeah, I hadn't. Yeah, I can highly recommend that. It's a very,
Okay.
very entertaining book.
All right, we got a couple great book recommendations there. Getting back to our questions on the agenda, I know a lot, you're super busy with everything you're doing. You're about to start a new podcast, so congratulations on that. I'm excited to hear that. And you got these great books, and you speak. You got all these things going on, and you're a super busy man. But a lot of us do try to make time to, whether we give of our time, money, or our energy to like volunteer work, charities, nonprofit organizations, just these things that are in the world doing good in the world. So what the goal of this question is that whether you participate in any way with it, or if it's just something that you admire the work that they're trying to do in the world, what is a charity, nonprofit, or volunteer organization that you like to what I call shine a light on, and just share
Yeah,
a little bit about what they're doing, and then if you provide me their socials and link, I'll put that in the description as well.
yeah. Well, in the UK, we have a thing called Cyber Helpline, which does exactly what it says on the tin. People who've had a cyber incident can phone up Cyber Helpline, email them, get in touch
That's
with them,
nice. Yeah.
and get help. And it's staffed by volunteers. They do a lot of fundraising. They have input from various sort of organisations to help them raise funds. And having talked to people who've been through these kind of incidents, I think it's very easy to think, well, you get a dodgy email, you sort it out, it's all fine. The corrosive effect on people's trust in everything is quite astonishing. I've had friends who've just literally gone offline. They don't even use mobile phones anymore. That's the level
Yeah.
of distrust that springs out of a single incident. They just don't know what they can trust anymore. Cyber Helpline can help people get through that. It's really important charity.
Well, that's very important because it's not just about the actual crime and trying to get through just that and the consequences of that. There's also the mental and emotional dealings that you have to deal. That's so important because, like you said, it can completely change the rest of your life. From a mental perspective, emotional perspective.
Yeah.
Um, Wow, Geoff, we've kind of reached towards the end of the podcast. And again, I appreciate you giving us all this time to talk about your great works and just give us that insight into, the bridge of finance, crimes, and tech, because again, we don't have enough people talking about it. And I do advocate for a lot of folks that if you have ever considered digital forensics or reverse malware engineering, these are great jobs that we need more people in because again, everybody wants to do the pen testing and auditing, and that's good and well, but we need people to take it to that next level. So again, message me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can give you some recommendations to some paths to take because when it comes to this intersection of crime and tech, we got to have some people that are super sharp that takes it beyond just a regular pen tester. They got to take it up to like digital forensics level 99. Geoff, I give all my guests the final word. So it doesn't mean that you have to talk about your books or about crime or tech. It could be whatever you want to talk about, but the final word is yours.
The final word is mine. Oh God, that's quite a broad question. I look. I'll be honest. The world seems to be changing at the moment at quite a rapid rate. We've seen a movement to the right politically in a lot of countries. A lot of previously more politically liberal democratic type countries have shifted to the right. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. I'm not massively political about that. But what I do think is that I worry that we are in danger of becoming a more selfish, frightened bunch of people, and that the world will increasingly seem to be and be portrayed to be a scary and dangerous and worrying place, and that we need to batten down the hatches and not share. And that's a and I understand that I, as an investigative journalist covering crime, can feed into that this sense of hopelessness and the sense that you just have to hang on to what you've got and sod everybody else. Don't do that. If in any areas of your life, keep sharing, keep talking to people, even people you don't agree with. Keep understanding that the world is a hopeful place, and that ultimately, bad as you might think things are, have a think back to 100 years ago and how stuff was then and what we didn't have and how many children died very, very young, needlessly young, and how many people got glaucoma and just went blind because they didn't get operations. You know, keep hopeful about the world and keep sharing that hope. That's what I'd say.
Wonderful. Well, the extraordinary and the brilliant Geoff White has shared so much with us. And again, folks, check the description below. There's so many links and check out his books. Again, this man is brilliant. And I look forward to everything else he has in his future coming out. So thank you, Geoff, so much.
Really kind. Thanks so much for having me, Jim. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.